During our weekly Zoom session with Father Iannuzzi recently, someone shared a beautiful story about the angels, and a couple of stories from Father too. So let me start this video by sharing this clip I've put together for you.
And in relation to the angels, the mystics teach us all holy angels, archangels, saints, martyrs, and holy ones of God. They are all with you, but you must call them when you're praying, that they don't just come, you have to call them. And I'll just share a small little story. It's very quick. I remember back maybe 8-9 years ago, I was going to Mass on Sunday, and I was late for Mass. And of course, I was driving quite fast on the road, and the road was very windy. And I said, Jesus, let the priest be late. Let the priest be late. I don't want to be late for Mass. I don't want to be late for Mass, you know. And I was beginning to break into a sweat. But when I got there, I was, of course, a little bit late. And the priest was late coming out on the altar. And when the priest came out on the altar, he says, this is the first time I've been late for Mass. And he said, it's never happened before. And all I could do was laugh. And when I went into confessions, I told the priest, and I said, I'm sorry, Father, that was my fault because I asked Jesus to make him late. So it's just to share that God does hear our prayers, and so
yes, God does hear your prayers. Thank you for sharing that beautiful story. If that happened to me, that actually happened to me. I don't know. I won't say it was somebody else's fault, but I came late for Mass because I forgot to set the alarm for the time change during spring. In every spring on the 22nd in the US, we have to change the clock, and I forgot to do it. So I showed up in Mass an hour early and nobody was there. And I said, how odd. This is the first time that no one's for Mass. So I said, instead of saying Mass, I'll go have some breakfast and then come back again, check maybe so they'll come later. Then I'm having breakfast and they're banging on my door. Father, you're late for Mass. I said, no, I'm not. So I get into Mass. They said, you were an hour late. I said, I was here an hour ago. And they said, no, we forgot to set the clock. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, but I must tell you one thing. I'm never late for Mass. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, the Mass can't start without me. How can I be late for Mass? Let's suppose now I get into some sort of predicament and I can't finish my prayers like last night. Last night I went down south because there was flooding due to the quick thaw of the snow and the lack of height of dams. Nothing up here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, everything's fine. But in the Lower Peninsula, everything was flooded. Houses were 3 feet in water, and the church's basement, where I was pastor for 3 years, was flooded. So I drove 2 hours down there, and I helped them install a new sump pump to pull out the water. We got the water out, and then I had to drive to the store to buy a new pump. We needed a third one, and then we came back. So I ended up driving 6 hours. Finally came back home past midnight. I didn't have a chance to do my Mass. So I did my Mass like 12:30 in the morning to finish. So sometimes you can't get all your prayers done due to no fault of your own. But while I was driving, I did all my rosaries. So what do you do when you cannot finish these kind of things? You let your angel do it, if it's not your fault. When it's beyond your fault, you'll ask your angel to do it, and he will do it for you if he can do it. You know, I've been reading the last few days in bed I'm in bed, but before going to sleep, this old work that I've read many years ago, and I'm rereading it, called The Unpublished Manuscript on Purgatory. And the nun in Purgatory, it's approved by the church, is telling the nun on earth, Sister Mary of the Cross, in the late 1800s, throughout the day, you should stop what you're doing and say, God, what do you want me to do in this moment? And she said, make this a habit every so often throughout the day. Stop what you're doing, recollect yourself, and turn your attention to God. She said, if you do this, it pleases God intensely, because it means that you want God to participate in everything you're doing, and he wants to. He wants to guide you. He wants to help you. And I tried that a few times too, and I'm telling you, it changes a lot of things. It's a beautiful practice. So like what you did, you said, oh, you did a little prayer. You wanted the car to move, and God answered your prayer. Or like the other woman asking for the priest to be late, and God allowed him to be late. You know, we could also send our angels to talk to their angels. Like I'm supposed to have surgery at the end of the month, and I'm starting to send my angel already to the doctor's angel, so that he doesn't bleed me out. so that he does it the right, what we can do is put our trust in God, knowing that we're in good hands, and leave the rest up to him. So yeah.
By the way, he's going to have a surgery at the end of this month, so please pray for him. And then the other thing is, if you'd like to be part of the weekly Zoom session, there's a Zoom link I've provided for you on the community post. And then, there's another thing I'd like to cover in this video. It's about demonic whispers. I'm not sure if that's the exact right term, but there's something the producer of the Conjuring movies said that really reminds me of a clip from Father Carlos Martins.
When we were doing The Conjuring, when Lorraine Warren was alive then, and my brother and I did a lot of research with Lorraine, and I kid you not, she was in Connecticut, we're in Malibu, and we're talking on the phone, and suddenly you'd hear, like voices over the line, and she would just start praying right in the middle of our conversation. They would fade out, and she goes, boys, whatever we're talking about, that's called interference. So let's make sure we put that.
You start to hear voices. The first thing you should do is pick up a phone, call your doctor, get an appointment, don't jump to the spiritual. It is far more likely that there's something medically wrong with you, that you have some kind of medical pathology at some level, whatever the heck it is. So medicine needs to be unleashed upon you. They need to check you out. Yeah, and I will say this, even in people who are demonically afflicted, not all of them hear voices. In fact, in my experience, I think less of them hear voices than do not. I think overall, less, like, it's certainly not a complaint that I hear about from every victim that I've ever dealt with. They will sense a compulsion. They will sense a drive, a kind of an obsessive behavior directing them towards some action, some kind of behavior. But it's not necessarily that they have a dialogue happening in their mind. And people who suffer from schizophrenia, they will state that they hear a voice, or that they see things. And what they're experiencing are usually auditory hallucinations. It's a hallucination that expresses itself in words and sentences, but they're so arresting, they're so compelling that they'll describe it as seeing things or as a voice that's speaking to them. But they're not literally hearing sound, but they are being impressed upon by words and sentences, which they describe as a voice because it is hitting them so acutely, so arrestingly.
And there's just one more short clip of Father Martins I'd like to share with you. I can really relate to it because I grew up with an alcoholic father. I know for anyone who's been in the same situation, it can be incredibly difficult, and it took me many years to finally forgive him.
Take it to the Lord. Ask for his healing. Bring him the symptoms and undertake the work for that. And expect that it's going to take more than just a 10-second prayer. How badly do you want these patterns of destruction eliminated from your family line? All right. So if you really want it, then you're prepared to engage in the battle for more than 10 seconds. Like a steady, daily encounter with God, asking him, asking his saints, asking the angels to come and make battle against this dysfunction. And it can be anything. It can be, hey, that no male in the family makes it past 55 years of age and they have a heart attack. At heart, is it the devil causing that? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's just purely a genetic thing. But that, in and of itself, is something that God can heal. And that exists ultimately because of the fall of Adam and Eve, which brought sickness into the world, which brought death into the world. God can heal that. Start doing battle with that every day. Maybe in your family, marriages end in divorce in an uncanny way. Or maybe there's a pattern of incredible infidelity. Or maybe there's a pattern of violence in some way. Maybe you don't notice any patterns. But that doesn't mean there aren't any patterns. Even if you think your family is more or less all right and has been spared, you don't know. So undertake that. Lord, bring healing into my family line. Bring healing into the entire human family. Bring healing into the Gonzalez family that lives across the street, which that family always seems to be subject to bad luck and horrible things happening, but bring healing into the Campbell family that also seems to always be fighting horrific marital problems and so forth. They deal with alcoholism constantly. That should always be the first mode of our reaction. Don't be looking for an exorcist right away. Look, there are almost 5 billion people in the world, and there's painfully too few priests and even fewer exorcists to be able to do this, to be able to treat everybody, to be able to sit down with everybody and help you identify patterns. And so undertake that work with the Lord, right? Get hunker down with some prayer. You have the authority of a son or daughter of God. You have the authority. You know what? Like a child is under authority of mom and dad, but a child also makes his authority felt, right? He cries, he expresses a need, boom, mom and dad spring into action. And the same goes for us and God. He responds to our prayers, that our prayers are endearing to him because we are his sons and daughters. So don't sell your prayers short. They are endearing to God, they have an effect on God, and they bring about good.
And just before we get to the end of this video, I just thought it's a good idea to include this one from my past interview with Father Francis Tiso on death. It was not actually planned, really, but at the start of the interview I found out that he's been battling cancer. But anyway, there was something he shared about the Rosary that's really beautiful. Listen to this.
The daily Rosary actually helps you a lot in focusing your attention so that in those final days, perhaps you're in the hospital, you're very sick, you're in pain, there's a lot of things going on, it's very confusing. If you have that Rosary and you're saying your Rosary, you're going to click on the graces of God during those very difficult times. And I've seen many, many elderly people many times. This is not unusual. If they have been saying the Rosary regularly through the years of their life, and they come to their final illness, and the person is barely conscious, they may not even be able to recognize the priest or may not be able to recognize Holy Communion. Yet, if I start saying the Hail Mary and the Our Father with them, they can respond. So, on some level, the fact that they have been used to those prayers remain in their memory, even when the brain itself is shutting down. It's a very powerful message. It says that, that human consciousness rooted in prayer can face up to death and get to the other side in deep peace and security. All right. And I think we all want that inner preparation of persons who have prayed and prayed habitually and humbly. And then you have the church's liturgy and the sacraments, which provide the support of a loving community around them. The other thing that I think is really important, how many priests have preached about this? I don't know if anybody's listening. You have families that are afraid that if they call the priest, that the loved one is going to freak out and be all upset, and of course, many people who are dying know that they are dying. So the fact that nobody wants to talk about it is only more painful for them. But a lot of people think that to have the priest come to anoint the person or give them viaticum or hear their confession is going to upset this person, which is, of course, a terrible mistake. I mean, you're leaving a person at the most spiritually critical moment of their lives without spiritual guidance, which is a terrible act of cruelty. All right, which another thing I discovered. This is this is kind of more on a lighter side. Some people were afraid to call the priest. Get this, not because they were afraid that the dying person was going to be upset about dying, but they were upset that the priest would see them in such a miserable condition. Okay. lying in bed, sick and all that. And of course, I preached a sermon about that. I said, we priests are trained for that. That's what we're here for. We're not looking to just visit people who are well dressed, clean, and happy. We're trained to go visit the people who are in big trouble. The other day, coming back from that very nice lunch with the family, there was an old lady in the middle of the street waving me to stop the car. Now, how could I not stop the car? There's this poor, frail old person in the middle of the street. And so I stopped the car. I got out. What's the matter? What's the matter? And I could see that here's a person who was completely shattered. Her skin was motley, her clothes were poor. She hardly knew what day of the week it was. She was wandering around trying to find a store that was open so she could buy something to eat, she said. Right? Of course, it was Sunday afternoon. No place was open. So I took her first to visit a friend of mine who runs a restaurant, and I also had some food in the car and to take care of her. And then I found out that she lived only a short distance away from the restaurant, and so I drove her there. And who do I find but her cousin and some relatives that were visiting her? And they were all upset that she had wandered off. But of course, this is what happens with elderly people when the brain is deteriorating. So we had a very good conversation, although even they were a little embarrassed. And I said, "No, you shouldn't be embarrassed. This is my calling. This is, a priest is supposed to do this kind of thing." And so to calm them down and help them try to find a way to help this woman who clearly does need assistance. So this is what we're doing, all right, when we are caring about people who are in the last phase of their lives. We try to be with them. We try to visit them. We're not embarrassed by the fact that their skin looks bad or their clothes are dirty. We're worried about that person who is called to eternal life. They're called to be a saint. No matter what it looks like on the outside, something on the inside is of great value.
And here's the part of the interview where he talked about preparing for death. It's an uncomfortable subject for some, I know, but it is going to happen eventually, to everyone. So this is a good reminder for you and me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the past year, I've been thinking about death quite a lot because I might have been much more ill than I perhaps was. And so I was thinking, about my own death and preparing for that. So what do we do? I mean, I think I would say common sense, although I have to tell you that one of my dearest friends, younger than I am, who was very, very ill, and was very devout, would go to Mass and receive Holy Communion as often as possible throughout his illness, did not write a will in that whole period of time. And his fiancee told me he didn't do this because he felt that writing a will was a way of acquiescing in the inevitability of his own death. And as a result, of course, his relationship with this woman is undocumented from a legal point of view. So that it was actually, I mean, we don't want to be judgmental. And he was a very dear and good person, but it was kind of a serious act of irresponsibility, all right, with regard to the relationships that he had established in his life, not to have written a will. So I would put at the top of the list, all right, I mean, I myself, when I was diagnosed and I knew I had to undergo cancer treatments, the first thing I did was go to Padre Antonio, who was the Franciscan friar who was the chaplain in that hospital, and received the sacrament of anointing of the sick. All right, that was the first thing. And I will say, every time I went for a treatment, I said a prayer in the chapel, right, offering my life and whatever I was going to face to our Lord, in reparation for my own sins. Okay. But I also sat down and worked out my own will. All right. So I have my will and testament with everything, properly written down and, you know, indicating the people that I care about that I want them to receive something from whatever I have here, okay? And the other thing was to write my own, uh, funeral mass, what I would like to have happen at the funeral mass, the simplicity and the clarity and the music and the readings and all of that, and send that to the Vicar General of the diocese so that they have that document on record, that I have taken care of that. Okay. I also made sure with my parents, because my parents are still alive. And I said, would you mind if I had my body cremated and then buried here? And they said, no, we don't want you to be cremated. We want you to be sent back to America to be buried with us. Okay, so I did discuss this with my parents and try to respect their feelings with regard to burial. They have a place where they're going to be buried, and they want me to be buried with them. So I think I can accept that, and that's in my will. All right, so I gave a lot of thought to these things, and I think we all should do that, whether we're ill or not. It's a good idea to have a will and a plan in case something happens. I mean, every day there are accidents, and the act, like I said before about intention, right? I intend to do these prayers right now with clarity of mind in honor of my Lord and God. I intend to make sure, for profound moral reasons, that should I die, that everything is going to be taken care of in a way that is respectful of those who are going to remain behind, my family, my friends, and so on. So I think that's a good practice of meditation, because when you just think about dying, you might say, oh, gee, I hope I don't die by having a car accident. I hope I don't end up in the hospital. You can say all these things, but when you actually prepare concretely for what's going to happen, it makes you more courageous, and more ethical. It's not just about how I might feel if I ended up, getting crushed under my car or something like that. It's more like I'm caring about others. I'm thinking about other people. And in thinking about other people, I am also asking Christ to guide my conscience, all right, in the proper disposition of my belongings and also my intentions, when I pass away. All right, so that means that at any time, if somebody is going to, something happens, you've taken care of a lot of things, and I think that gives peace to your heart. We also have something, the old tradition of devotion to Saint Joseph, as the patron of a happy death, because it's understood that the fact that Joseph is not mentioned in the Gospels during the public ministry of Jesus, it means that he was probably dead. Okay. And so he had Jesus and Mary at his side when he passed away. All right. So he becomes the model of an ideal kind of death. So this also takes us to some, things that ought to be obvious. But as a priest, I can tell you they're not that obvious to people.
Anyway, that's all from me this time. I hope you have learned something useful. I'll always try to improve how I deliver these information from time to time, and I'm sorry there are so many weaknesses in my videos. If you feel like supporting the works here, please consider supporting us on Patreon or making a donation to PayPal, because I'm trying to reduce the reliance on the ads in the videos. But if you can't, still I want to thank all of you for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. Much love to all of you, and may God bless you.